everybody, welcome to Saxon's Hydrosphere. I'm Saxon and I love music and I love movies, and with this channel I wanted to create a space where both music and movie lovers can coexist. So today I'm going to be doing another discography ranking video. I have recently done one of these for both Dream Theater and Rush not too long ago. I really enjoy these kind of ranking videos, and today I want to talk about Megadeth's discography. So Megadeth are a band that were hugely important to me around my mid to late teens when I was really super into thrash metal. I'm not so well versed in thrash metal anymore, but I do still appreciate and enjoy a lot of the classics, and Megadeth are no exception to this. And with their 16th album, The Sick, the Dead and the Dying, set for release next month, I thought now would be a really appropriate time for me to do one of these videos for Megadeth. So some of their albums I really love and some of their albums I really don't, but at the same time I feel like in this ranking there might be some choices I make that might be quite the hot take. So without further ado, let's get into it. To start things off with number 15, the bottom of their albums for me, and that is Super Collider. So Super Collider was released in 2013, and at the time I was a little bit of an apologist for this album, and I have no idea why really, because there really isn't a lot to like on this album at all. The whole record just feels very uninspired and very sluggish overall. I think Kingmaker was a decent song, and the title track had potential to be a good song if it wasn't for the very sloppy vocal delivery and quite bizarre tone. I actually think that the best song on the album is their version of Thin Lizzy's Cold Sweat. Now, when a cover song is the best song on the album, you know you've got a bit of a stinker of a record, unfortunately. Number 14, I'm going with The World Needs a Hero. I actually remember the day I bought this album and listened to it for the first time and feeling an overwhelming sense of disappointment. This is just not an album that has ever really stuck with me, unfortunately. There are a couple of okay songs, like Dreading the Fugitive Mind is probably the best song. The title track's okay, Disconnect is alright, but other than that this is just an incredibly forgettable album, and the song Return to Hangar felt like a very poor and desperate attempt to kind of rekindle the magic of the early years that they were going for. And on top of that, I also find the production to be very sour. Not much sticks out in the way of vibrancy or tone. It's all very kind of flat and horrible. So there's nothing massively offensive on this album like Super Collider. It's just pretty nothingy and very forgettable. Number 13, The System Has Failed. Now this is a bit of a weird one for me, because while I feel that 70% of the album is just total filler and very forgettable, there are some songs in here with a very distinct identity unto themselves and are actually really great songs. A great blend of punchy riffs and catchy metal choruses are commonplace here, and across these better tracks I think it really works. The Scorpion I think is the best example of this, being one of the more unique songs on the album, as well as Die Dead Enough. We also have songs like Blackmail the Universe and Kick the Chair, packing that bit more aggressive punch that's executed very well. Back in the Day is another fun song too, but as high as those highs are, unfortunately the rest of the album is, like I said, just very fillery and very forgettable. And just to nitpick, Dave Mustaine likes to do a very particular cliche that I think is used to its most obnoxious on this album, and that's the whole news report over the main riff trope, and I just don't like it. Number 12, I'm going with Risk. So I don't hate Risk. I actually feel like the variety and the experimentation with different styles and sounds actually mostly pays off for me. A few stinkers in here like Ecstasy and The Doctor Is Calling is an absolutely awful song, but I do find myself enjoying a lot of the other material for various different reasons, and I just can't help it. Crush 'Em is a fun time and does a really good job at building momentum, and I personally don't mind the cheesiness in the chorus too much. Breadline is one of my favourites, very catchy and has a very bittersweet vibe to it. Prince of Darkness is a pretty decent metal song once you get past the kind of annoying introduction. I also quite like Wanderlust for the most part and think the band pulls off this style of alternative rock very well. And Seven is an absolute banger, a song that I really don't think would sound too out of place on like a 70s Sabbath album or something. If you can look past it not being a thrash metal album and just accept that this was a band willing to experiment and just see what happens, I do feel like there is actually quite a lot to like, and I appreciate a lot of the diversity on display here. So give Risk another go. I promise you it's not nearly as bad as you may remember for the most part. Number 11, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. It's probably an unpopular opinion being this far down on the list, but with the debut, I can just kind of take it or leave it really. Nothing bad in particular, but Dave Mustaine really had a point to prove on this album, and he wears that attitude on his sleeve. Everything is fast for the sake of being fast and angry for the sake of being angry, and while that's fine, it just doesn't always work for me and doesn't keep me interested for the entire runtime. It's not bad, and I do find it enjoyable in places, especially for its tongue-in-cheek tone that creeps in here and there, but if I really want that thrashier side of Megadeth, there are some albums that are far better realised than this one that I will go to first before the debut. Number 10, 13. This is a bit of a frustrating one for me because half of these songs are great. Songs like Sudden Death, Black Swan, Never Dead, Wrecker, all killer songs, as well as the lead single for the album, Public Enemy No. 1, and Whose Life is a great song with a real punk vibe to it. And while these songs do hold quite a lot of weight and a lot of balls and attitude to them, the other half of the album feels very uninspired, with a lot of filler tracks, a lot of previously unreleased tracks remade for this album, and I feel like they were trying so hard to get to 13 tracks to fit with the concept of the album that they kind of lost a bit of the integrity along the way, and it made for a bit of a drawn out, tiresome listening experience when all is said and done. Number 9, Cryptic Writings. Cryptic Writings is an album that holds a very homely place for me from when I was diving into the band's discography as a teenager, and I have a lot of fun memories of listening to this album quite a lot with a friend of mine, and I do think this album still holds up. I don't see a lot of high praise for this album, but for me, I think it balances the heavy metal and pop rock genres perfectly. There are a couple of duds in the track list, Use the Man probably being the weakest song on the album for me, but a lot of the other songs I find really rich in character with a healthy balance of heavy riffs and catchy choruses and not much in the way of filler. Trust is a great opener paired very well with the next song, Almost Honest. The Disintegrators is full of so much energy, and She-Wolf is among some of my favourite Megadeth songs to date. Seriously underrated album that deserves a little bit more attention than it gets. Number 8, United Abominations. This was the album that really saw the band's reformation after a fairly clunky early 2000s. United Abominations is very well produced, has a lot of standout performances, and with this being the only album to feature Glenn Drover on lead guitar, I think he leaves a very unique stamp on this album that you can't really find in other Megadeth records. A lot of great songs in here that are kind of staples in the modern era of Megadeth, like Sleepwalker, Washington Is Next, Never Walk Alone, the title track, Burnt Ice is great, and my only issue is that I find the pacing a little stunted at times, and I don't really care for the lyrical themes of the album. Megadeth have always written very heavily about American politics, but I think it's the most in your face on this album, and it's just a little bit too much for me and I don't care for it personally. Not a huge complaint really, and it might just be because I'm not an American, I'm English, and it just goes over my head a little bit, but I don't care for it massively. Apart from that though, there's nothing else wrong with this record. Great album. Number 7, Endgame. Endgame is an interesting one for me because this album came out right around the time that I was getting into them, and when this came out, I really remember wearing it out on my CD player and iPod. I loved this album, and for very good reason. There's a lot to love here. Strong production value and a lot of virtuosic musicianship, most notably from the newcomer Chris Broderick on guitar. But coming back to this album now, I do feel like it hasn't quite aged very well. A lot of the songs feel a little bit stale, a little bit stunted, just kind of rolling with the punches, and it does feel very much like a Guitar Hero album that most of the value is in all the flashy solos, which can get old. But those songs that do stand out, like This Day We Fight, 1320, Bite the Hand, Head Crusher, etc., do really contribute to the overall quality of the album and my enjoyment, and that's why I'm keeping it comfortably at number 7. Number 6, Euthanasia. Euthanasia is one of those albums that kind of feels like the black sheep for me, but not in a bad way at all. It just feels so different to everything else that they've released, while also being a very healthy progression from Countdown to Extinction. Keeping a lot of the more radio-friendly aspects of the previous album, with a lot of punch and grooves in the riffs, as well as big catchy choruses focused on hook and melody, and it completely pays off. I think the songwriting is stellar, as well as the very grey and moody sonic atmosphere of the album. The performances are tight and consistent, the songs stand apart from one another, it's a very consistent listen from start to finish. I do think that the use of older song titles for the lyrics of Victory a little bit self-indulgent and a little bit cringy, but apart from that I really don't have a problem with Euthanasia anywhere. Number 5, So Far So Good So What. I usually see this album ranked a lot lower than here, and it's a little bit of a weird one for me because if I were to just look at the track list and pick off a song to listen to, I wouldn't choose half of these songs to listen to on their own. But when listening to this album from start to finish, I find it so fun and so engaging, and there's a lot of progressive elements to the thrash side as well. Into the Lungs of Hell is a fantastic instrumental opener leading perfectly into Set the World on Fire, which is one of the best songs of their early days for me personally. In My Darkest Hour is a classic, and I also really love the tone of Liar and Hook in Mouth as well. I think they're very unique songs across Megadeth's entire discography. I also always forget that this came after Peace Sells and not before it, due to its very raw production and even rawer artwork. But unlike the debut, I really enjoy the rawness of the sound on this album, and I think it really adds to the atmosphere of the songs. I just think it's a really fun thrash metal album, and I always enjoy coming back to it. Number 4, Countdown to Extinction. Countdown is a classic Megadeth album, and I do still really enjoy this one a lot. I don't ever really need to hear Symphony of Destruction again, and Sweating Bullets is also a little bit worn out for me now, but they'll always be classics amongst their discography. And on top of that, we have songs like Skin of My Teeth, High Speed Dirt, which are very energetic songs and ones that I've always loved since first hearing them, as well as all the mid-tempo songs on this album as well, like Foreclosure of a Dream and the title track. The only track holding this one down for me is Psychotron. I just really don't enjoy that track, but apart from that, I love this album, and the only reason it's not higher is because I just enjoy the top 3 just that little bit more. To start the top 3, we have Dystopia. Their latest album released 6 years ago, and for me this was such a refreshing step in the right direction for this band. Dystopia is chock full of great songs that stand out from one another, ranging from the really quite dark and dreary to very uplifting and vibrant sounding. I think the addition of Chris Adler and Kiko Loureiro really enhanced and revitalized the sound of this band, Kiko especially. He's the best guitarist that this band have had since Friedman, and his playing is a huge factor in my enjoyment of this album. He's got such an eclectic and flavorful way of playing that really complements the band in ways that I couldn't have imagined really when he was first announced that he was joining. The only songs that don't do much for me are Post-American World and Poisonous Shadows, but even so they still have something interesting to add here and there. And those 2 tracks aside, I find everything else here so engaging, so enjoyable. And like I said, there's just such an invigorating freshness and integrity to this album that really gets me excited for what's next to come with Megadeth. Number 2, Peace Sells But Who's Buying? So I'm pretty sure it's unanimous across Megadeth's entire fan base that Peace Sells and Rust in Peace are the 2 definitive Megadeth albums, and I can't really argue with that. Peace Sells is such an important album for the subgenre, and after revisiting it for the first time in years, I'm really glad that it does still hold up massively. This was the 2nd album of their career, and it was such a huge step up in musical maturity from their debut. The musicianship and songwriting really show that the band were such a tight unit at this stage in the creation of this album, and the production quality is great for the time as well. The pacing is great, it's coherent from start to finish, the songs are fantastic. Definitely an album that deserves its high status amongst 80s thrash metal. And number 1, to nobody's surprise, is of course Hidden Treasures. Of course it's not, I'm only joking. It's Rust in Peace, obviously. One of the most iconic albums for thrash metal and guitar players ever, and while I don't think every song is perfect, this is still an absolute blinder of an album. It was the beginning of the Mustaine, Ellefson, Friedman and Menza era of the band, and they just captured pure magic on this album. Marty Friedman's guitar playing is a force of its own, that goes without saying. The guitar solos and instrumental passages of this album reached creative heights never seen by the band before or since. And whenever I get to Lucretia, I can't not think about how that solo was completely improvised. That's just insane to me. The pacing is superb, and again, it's the performances and the subtle complexity that really makes this album as special as it is. I remember really wearing this album out as a teen. It was probably in the first 10 CDs that I'd ever bought, and I still revisit this album pretty much a good couple of times a year, and it always holds up for me. It's an absolute blast to listen to. And there we have it, all 15 studio albums from Megadeth ranked from worst to best on the run-up to their new album, The Sick, The Dead and The Dying, which you can bet I'll be reviewing for you. I've enjoyed going back to Megadeth's discography. It's a band that I've not listened to in a long time, despite being one of my favourites from my teens. I've enjoyed going back and listening to all their stuff, and I think I will continue to do so for a good few weeks or so. And I'm very looking forward to their new album. I actually really enjoyed both of the singles they've put out. Can't wait. It's going to be good. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what your least favourite and most favourite Megadeth albums are. And do consider checking out my Patreon. I've got some stuff over there to offer all about the videos I do and my own music that I'm writing. I've got some stuff over there. I'd be very grateful if you were to check it out. I'm going to leave you with my song of the day now, which has to be my favourite Megadeth song, and surprise to nobody, it's Tornado of Souls. Absolute banger. See you next time.